Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on another exciting episode of the Campus Life on UJTV. According to UNESCO, multilingual and multicultural societies exist through their languages, which transmit and preserve traditional knowledge and cultures in a sustainable way. International Mother's Language Day was celebrated by UJ earlier this year. Let us join in on this celebration.
So today we appreciate the diversity of our languages, but equally important, we appreciate the scholars who study these languages. Now, people who are much more intelligent than me, who study the origins of language, they are called evolutionary linguists. They tell us that sometime between 150,000 years ago to 200,000 years ago, our prehistoric ancestors of our species developed for the first time the capacity to communicate verbally and non-verbally in complex ways for the first time. And suffice it to say, we have never looked back. Through our capacity for language, we have been able to communicate, to sing, to give poems, to govern, to administer, to think, and ultimately to understand our world and our place in it. Our languages have become, as the theme of today's celebration says, our identities. And precisely because of this, identities have often clashed. In the realm of politics and international relations, we know that language has been used to group people, to classify people, to oppress others, and to even attempt to erase linguistic communities, and sometimes with success. Yet, linguistic diversity is an asset, and it enriches all of us, doesn't it? In recognition of this history of linguistic oppression, the United Nations, through UNESCO, has declared the 10 years between 2022 and 2032 to be the decade of indigenous languages. And UJ is playing its part, and in fact has always been ahead of the curve. Our own university has long since adopted a policy of multilingualism, having done so in 2006 when it was just 1 year old. UJ does not just preach multilingualism, however, it also practices it. Professor Mbedi's book, From the Baobab to the Mosquito, is subtitled Rethinking Leadership Through African Sayings, and it does precisely that. It uses the facility of African proverbs, which contain boundless wisdom that is contained in the richness of our languages, to illuminate the often erratic 21st century landscape. Today we are here to also celebrate another important book, which stands as a contribution to the African library and the African canon of thought. I'm referring here to Professor Liz Garner's volume, Umuntu wasezulwini nabantu abahle bakaNkulunkulu, u-Isaiah Shembe nebandla lamaNazaretha. Just rolls off the tongue, especially for me because I got a distinction in isiZulu. But for those of you who are not so lucky, I'll give you the English version of the title, The Men of Heaven and the Beautiful Ones of God, Isaiah Shembe and the Nazareth Church. Professor Garner edited and translated this volume, which she published in 2004 with the UKZN Press. And I was teasing her that she should have waited 20 years later to publish it with UJ Press, which now exists and is flourishing. And she's promised that her next volumes will surely be given a first consideration to the UJ Press, isn't it, Professor Garner? Fantastic.
Norman, it is a great privilege to be able to explore the significance of linguistic diversity and its crucial role in forming our identities as we come together to celebrate the International Mother Language Day. This is something that we have to celebrate every year, And my wish is that next year we make it bigger and better. Ladies and gentlemen, language is more than just a means of communication. It is our cultural legacy, a window into our descent, customs, history, and collective wisdom. Each and every culture has got its, positive sides and so on. But imagine if we were to take the nice parts of each and every culture. Of course, not forgetting the language, because remember I said language and culture are interlinked, and we will really celebrate each other every day. Language can divide us, culture can divide us, but it can also unite us, and this is what we need to do. And it gets even more special when you add, this as a mother language, mother tongue. There's nothing as special as mothers and mother figures in our lives and the language that they speak. So, in commemorating International Mother Language Day, we honor the linguistic mosaic that forms our global community and celebrate the wonders of diversity and the ability of languages to empower people everywhere. And in the process, of course, we should have fun. I saw a clip where somebody was asking, what do you call mosquitoes in your mother tongue? I don't know if you saw the clip. Somebody shared it with me because the title of the book that I recently published is From the Baobab to the Mosquito. He said, take a look at this since you love mosquitoes. So they say to this guy, what do you call a mosquito in your mother tongue? He says, no, we don't call them. They just come and bite us. So it also tells you about some of the challenges with languages, because there's also misunderstandings, that what means something in one language may mean another, and so on. But we should just celebrate and enjoy them. Today, ladies and gentlemen, as the University of Johannesburg, we reaffirm our commitment to protecting and advancing linguistic diversity as a fundamental component of national identity and international peace. Prophet Zenze already talked about the things that we are doing as a university. We have this Mother's Day book coming that I'm looking forward to it. My wish is that we have it translated, resources permitting, to all the official languages that we have, at least as a start, and celebrate this, because really the stories that have been are contained in these chapters are forever there, and there are people who would read them and say, I see my mother figure in this chapter. So I say, colleagues, to all of us, may we never stop appreciating how language can break down barriers and bring people together in a shared journey of understanding and appreciation. I thank each and every one of you for your attention. Thanks to the organizers for organizing this important event. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, Dumelang, Ralocha. Kinna Khopotso Raphaju, and I'll be rendering a Sepedi poem, and it's titled Tapelo, meaning prayer. Ke bitsa ditempele ka moka tse ileng tsa rwala moya o ko rwelego. Nketse ke no ba fela seporofeto sa lena. Nketse ke rwele bohloko le mabadi a lena. Le senkotle ke botšiša. Ana dithapelo tša Ramatla ohle di a arabja na. Ana diporofeto tša lena di a phethagala na. Malo, ke no tseba fela hore leleme le la lehumo la go šiša le ile la rwala molokoloko wa ditšhaba gale ebile le tla tšwela pele go dira jalo. Malo, ke no tseba fela gore leleme le la lehumo la go šiša le bula ditho tša motho la dikgoma, le kobolla mo go kobegileng, le phuthulla mo go phuthegileng. Ke ka fao matšatšing a ke ngangišana le letšatši ke re go lona nna le wena re fapane gole. O dirilwe ka mollo, ke dirilwe ka lerole. E upia go tshwana le wena le nna botho bo ngwala dithalošo ka lentšu la leleme la ka. Malo, gobaneng matšatšing a mmele wa ka o aparetšwe ke go gomola. E ka ba ke gona ge dithapelo tša Ramasedi di arabja. E ka ba ke gona ge diporofeto tša lena di phethegile. E ka ba ke gona ge re kwagetše na. Ke bitša go lena ditempele tše ileng tša rwala moya o ko o rwelego. Ke bitša le tšona tše ileng tša rwala le makgoritlha a gona. Kamphela ke a le bitša. Ke re ke kgopela re dumellaneng. A re kwaneng gore ga go sa hlokagala gore lentswe la ka le romele mokgatlo wa go nyaka. Mokgatlo wa go phuhlamiša batho bohle ba ba tswallang tsebe tša bona he ba ekwa lentswe la leleme le le humileng la go šiša. Ga go sa hlokagala gore lentswe la ka le romele mokgatlo wa go nyaka, wa go nyakišiša, wa go phuhlamiša batho bohle ba tshwelang mare lelemeng le. Gobane ditsebe ka moka di kwele. Gobane ke a tshepa thapelo ya Ramatlabohle e arabile. Thobela.
Sibanda sort of landed this request in my lap not very long ago and said, do something, you've written a lot. Come on, produce something. So anyway, here I am. And I want to talk to you on this very important day about multiliteracy and mother tongue language, and I just think it's very, very important. So I'm honoured and a little bit proud to be part of this day. So now I have to get rid of the glamour and put on the glasses. Okay, so this umuntu wasezulwini nabantu bahle bakaNkulunkulu, the man of heaven and the beautiful ones of God. How did I come to that? How did I come to that title? Well, it's what people were saying about Isaiah Shembe. So I decided to make it the title of this book, and you can see I edited and translated it, and I also wrote a substantial introduction, which I confess myself, I think is a very interesting introduction. And it would be quite nice to read if you get the chance. And that is a hint for the library to get this book if they have not got it. Now, I'm going to move on to what the book is about quickly and then why it's relevant, because I'm sure I'm out of time. Now, how were the hymns written down? And this again is very, very important. You might have a wonderful idea, the wonderful poet who performed for us. I don't know whether you wrote it all down, if you're still here, or whether you went back and composed it. How do people compose and write? Shembe would often have his hymns come to him in a dream. He would wake up and he'd had the dream. Or, as one of his early followers, a man called Johannes Duma, told me, he would stop and he would say, Zafika, the angels came. And the hymns would be written down by his young scribes. So right from the beginning, he used to go around when he traveled preaching, either on his horse or by train or with his followers, he would take his scribes with him. Now the interesting thing is the scribes were quite often girls. And one of them was called Sangiwa Magwaza, and there was also Pewa Bonambi, and when he was down the south coast, someone called Edith Khiliza. So females, women, and writing have a part in the early shaping of Shembe's church, which is extremely interesting for us women who are scholars and writers. Of course, it's interesting for the men too.
The annual Men's Forum took place earlier this year in March under the theme Breaking the Cycle, empowering men to prevent and combat gender-based violence. Let's take a look in terms of what went down here.
I'd like to warmly welcome you, and the event is entitled Men's Forum's Breaking the Cycle, Empowering Men to Prevent and Combat Gender-Based Violence. I just want to make a few comments before we start. And the topic of gender-based violence is a critical one for us, isn't that true? It is a very, very comparing one in the current context. And in South Africa and globally, there is increasing recognition that gender-based violence is serious, complex, and the most difficult issue to tackle. And we know the statistics, don't we? We often hear that 1 in 3 women across the world will experience some form of gender-based violence at least once in their lifetime. And if you look at global statistics, you see that 30% of women have experienced intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence, and that equates to about 736 million women around the world. According to the United Nations, gender-based violence can be viewed as acts that inflict physical, mental, sexual harm or suffering, threats of such acts, coercion, and other deprivations of liberty. And in contexts in which people have endured violence over the decades, and in contexts where men dominate and assert power over women, women do not always have the power, the strength, or the opportunity to report the violence and take action against perpetrators. Communal, cultural, and relationship dynamics often make it extraordinarily difficult to expose and eradicate acts of gendered violence. So given this scenario, it is certainly very important to hear more about how men themselves could be involved in the struggle against gender-based violence. So I'm really very pleased that today we have an expert on this particular topic, and we'll hear more about Mr. Luke Daniels, who is going to talk to us in a short while. But before we do that, before we get to the main speaker, I would like to invite our young Tabile Mulwana, who is going to offer us an opening performance.
Niphina madoda ndityatyadule nani ngalo mzuzu. Sinqandeni isenzo sobundlobongela obusekelwe ngakwisini kweli lizwe. Ndithi untshu kuni madoda athatha inxaxheba kuphuhliso kweli lizwe. Zikhumbuleni imvelaphi yenu nize imveli iqaqambileyo madoda. Xhathisani nilwela abantwana kunye nabafazi beli lizwe. Qeqeshani nakhe ilizwe elichubekileyo. Ndingubani namna ukuba ndinganika umyalelo kwikumkani. Kaloku amadoda zikumkani ngokudalwa. Izaphetha zamagorha ziyophuka xa kube amadoda. Phambili madoda phambili. Magorha mnyama endlu kakhokho. Senzeni sibe nebhongo neqhayiya ngani. Kaloku akafuneki amadoda azizindlobongela. Marhamba nendeva kwamthixaka. Yibuyiseni imbeko kweli lizwe. Rholani ihlahla lenkululeko. Madoda sabelani. Isizobe nasithwaliswa ngoyihlomkhulu kongquphantsi. Tongandini zemibhungisa ebetha kuvakale. Halala madoda.
Hello, it's a real pleasure for me to be here today. When I heard about this gathering at first and I saw the advert that you had up there, I thought it was a men's only. And in one way, I felt really pleased that I would be with men, with African men for a little while, but it's even better to have women here too. So I'm really delighted that it's a mixed group. Domestic violence, as we've heard from the introductory remarks, has been around for so long, and it seems like it's an intractable problem. Recurring and recurring, seems to be increasing in some ways. People find searching for solutions. I've been engaged with this for some time, and for me it's always about ending domestic violence. So my books and my writing is about how do we end it. My program, one of the first things we looked at is men's liberation. And I started with men's liberation because we have to raise men's awareness about the roles that they're playing. You know, generally men are still socialized to be providers and to be protectors. Those roles are still very much actively out there. I know of men who, during one recession, who actually committed suicide because they felt they were not being good providers. Being perpetrators now, being protectors is partly socializing men to be violent. You know, our countries and our governments, they still rely on men's violence. And it's one of the reasons that gender-based violence is persistent in societies, because still we rely on men's violence. Bell Hooks has rightly said that, you know, there's no way we can end gender-based violence without ending all violence. So we need to take a perspective that to end violence has got to be able to end in all violence. It's one of the reasons I think there hasn't been much change happening. Our countries still depend on men being violent, and especially I feel in the Western countries where you know, they still rely on forcing other nations to bend to their wishes, and we see this happening in the UK. So mostly, for most perpetrators who are hit as children, they had sexist attitude and behavior, socialization, being socialized for violence were some of those key things that were happening for them. And I look at the kind of images that we see of men generally. Usually we see men, it's about violence. And increasingly we see the socialization for women for violence. We see in more and more movies and more images, women are being encouraged into the military and the Western world, because some men are now beginning to get it that, you know, they don't want to spend their lives killing or getting killed. And so there's been a shortfall in some countries in terms of in the UK and America, and so there's more recruitment and more encouragement for women to join the military. And, you know, I think that is increasing and fueling some bits of women's violence. We know that is increasing. But that it persists, you know, after these thousands of years means that, you know, ending domestic violence is not going to be such an easy challenge. But I do feel it's a political issue that needs to be addressed. If there's a political will, it can be ended. From my understanding of it is that patriarchy is at the root of the problem. And by patriarchy, I mean the rule of men for the benefit of men. And we all live in patriarchal societies. And Professor Anta Diop argued that, you know, our societies in Africa were matrilineal and patrilineal, so both existed at the same time. And it's mostly that patriarchy was introduced into Africa in a way from Eurasia and spread throughout the world. From some of the work I've done in the Americas, we see deliberately how it was introduced through religion with the indigenous people in the Americas, where, you know, women and men live more as equals. And I think most societies at the beginning, men and women lived as equals. And we still have the existence of hunter-gatherer societies where there's less domestic violence, and we know that, you know, right here in Africa, the San, you know, you will know more about. Certainly there's less violence.
That's all we have for you today. Until we see you next time on another exciting episode, goodbye.